Well, it's closing time here in the bookshop, and it's also Burns Night. Now, traditionally, on the Ear Read This podcast, I release a podcast on a Burns poem. I will be doing that, but it's also my tradition to do it several days late. So that will be coming out in the next couple of days. In the meantime, I wanted to mark the night itself by pointing you towards a interesting new essay that's come out on the Glasgow Review of Books today. It's a long, quite trippy essay by a poet called Jim Ferguson. I really enjoyed it. I'll link it down below. It's a very involved, wide-ranging essay. It touches upon the poet Robert Tannahill as well in relation to Burns. Tannahill played a role in shaping the public image of Burns, firstly through the poems he wrote in tribute to Burns, but also as his role as the founding member, or one of the founding members, of the Paisley Burns Club. And really what Ferguson is getting at is how is Burns thought of today? How is the monolith of Burns faring in modern culture? Burns is a lot of things to a lot of different people. Naturally, as a poet himself, Ferguson focuses on whether or not Burns is a positive influence on contemporary Scottish poetry, a nourishing influence, casting a light on Scottish poetry, or whether he overshadows it. As Nabokov once said of the English dramatists in the Elizabethan age, they were a talent of undergrowth beneath Shakespeare's oak shade. Now, the piece really jumped out to me because my podcast, which will be coming out in the next couple of days, is about one of Burns's lesser liked poems called Address to Edinburgh. It is written in an English style, and critics have generally given it a pretty hard time. I wanted to look at it because there's all kinds of things to talk about in terms of Burns putting on airs to match Edinburgh's putting on airs. But one of the things it's most criticised for is it's Burns doing himself down. He says he is standing in the honoured shade of Edinburgh, an Edinburgh that went on later to, after they had celebrated him, patronised him and arguably reject him. So it's not popular with those poets who would prefer a Burns who was proud of himself, proud of his Scottishness and proud of his rural background, and not trying to flatter the enlightened, genteel audiences he found in Edinburgh. Ferguson, in his essay, mentions what is sometimes referred to as the Scottish cringe, a sort of tendency in the national character to feel embarrassment at Scotland's supposed cultural underachievement. In a way, Address to Edinburgh could be seen as Burns himself cringing from his ploughman background in order to pay due reverence to the bigwigs and the what's always called the literati of Edinburgh. And the other reason it stuck out is because, like clockwork, this is the time of year when there are a slew of articles asking whether or not we should be reading Burns at all. And sure enough, there's one in The Guardian today recapitulating some common accusations that have been thrown at Burns over recent years. Liz Lockhead comparing him to Harvey Weinstein, there's Stuart Kelly calling him a rapist, something which many scholars have accused Burns of over the years, and with good reason. There was more than one deeply unpleasant side to Burns. That said, there is a tendency for these articles, often written by poets, engaging in a bit of lucrative hand-wringing, accompanied by some really crap, shallow pastiche poetry about Burns, in which they call Burns a problem by using one of his own stanzas, and this is called incredibly subversive by a room full of peers who are anxious to share the poet's opinion. Which is interesting because it rather resembles someone trying to cringe both ways. Distance oneself from the monolith of Burns with all of his associated problems, but also tie yourself to him even closer in order to, promote your work. I often get the impression that people calling his verses immortal haven't read them or don't actually really like them, but kind of want to claim a famous scalp in order to promote themselves. Not saying people shouldn't write poems criticising Burns, by all means, but when it's a kind of, shallow pastiche, faux subversive, saying something that everybody agrees with, I find it a little bit hard to take. I don't think you should read Burns for moral instruction. I think you should read him if you like his poetry. And if you're looking for a warts and all biography that doesn't just point the finger and self-promote, then, as always, I recommend Catherine Carswell's biography from 1930 as a rollicking good read. Anyway, that's all from me for now. Happy Burns Night. I will leave the article by Jim Ferguson in the episode description box below.